Welcome to another exciting episode of Submission Radio. It is August 3rd. That was the Submission Radio 1-2 at the start of the video there. I'm Dennis Bermudez. I'm here with Kasper Ozlowski. Our show isn't big. It's huge today, and we have some big guests for you.
We certainly do. Today on the show, we'll be talking to none other than UFC, not quite Hall of Famer, but, you know, he should be in there, Frank Shamrock. He's an absolute MMA legend, and he's going to be chatting to us at the end of the show. We're also going to be speaking to Mike Kogan. He manages guys like King Mo, Nate Diaz. He's recently helped Paul Daly get into Bellator, and we've got a few questions for him. We want to pick his brain, find out what's happening with the Nate Diaz situation. You know, manages Jason High. What's the latest with Jason High? And we've got a returning guest today. Who else do we have, Dennis?
Well, we have none other than one of our favorite guys in the UFC's light heavyweight division. He's not Matt. He's not Rat. He's not Cat. He is Pat Cummins. He is on the show today. You know, Pat had such an amazing performance at UFC on Fox 12. We don't think that this man gets enough attention. He's got one of the best personalities in the light heavyweight division. We think he's going to be doing big things. We're putting our stamp of approval on him. We've got him back on the show today. We're going to discuss Pat Cummins versus Jon Jones versus Daniel Cormier and what's happening next in his life. So I'm excited to have Pat on the show. Apparently he makes some good pancakes as well. So I want to find out the recipes, Kasper.
Yeah, for sure. I want to find out about those delicious pancakes. I want to find out what happened to his tooth. That's another question we didn't ask him last time on the show, so we're definitely going to be asking that. As always, guys, check us out on Twitter, Submission AUS. Follow us for the latest news and everything that comes from the show. If you like the show, subscribe to the channel. Feel free to like the video if you have enjoyed it. If you want to skip to a specific interview, by all means, look in the click the annotations or look in the description below. We do list all the times for when people are coming on. And don't forget to send in your fan questions to info@submissionradio.com. If you have any questions for our fans, send those in. Or if you're going to have any questions for the fan questions segment where we talk about anything that the fans send those in there. So that's info@submissionradio.com.
Yeah, that's right. You know, and we like questions where you guys are expressing your opinions on stuff. So if there's something that's pissing you off in MMA right now, if there's something that, you know, really has your goat by the tail, as they say, not here in Australia, but I don't know, maybe somewhere else, if there's something that you feel really passionate about and you want to bring it to the table, you know, send it in. We'll have a chat about it. If your question's good enough, who knows? Maybe we'll even give you a call and put you on the show. You can discuss your own perspective from it. But as Kasper said, send it in because we will be choosing the best questions every week, and it's something that we are very excited about.
Yeah, and without further ado, guys, I think it's time for our first guest. So let's get him on the show. All right, guys, our next guest is a return guest. He's coming back to Submission Radio. He's had back-to-back fights recently, back-to-back interviews with Submission Radio. He's coming off a big win at UFC on Fox 12 over Kyle Kingsbury, one of the fastest rising light heavyweights in the UFC. He's none other than Pat Cummins. Pat, welcome back to Submission Radio.
Thank you, guys. Awesome to be here.
Great to have you back, Pat. Now, first question. You and Dennis Bermudez, obviously buddies. How sweet was it to both get big wins on the same card, and did you guys celebrate afterwards?
There's, you know, if it wasn't enough already, you know, I picked up a pretty decent win, and then I got to watch my little buddy Dennis go tear it up and really make some noise. I feel like he really solidified himself in his weight class now. I'm excited for him. And yeah, we definitely did a little celebration afterwards. It was a good time.
Everyone had a good time. Now, Pat, tell us a little bit about how you enjoyed your, you know, UFC on Fox 12 time. What was it like to be on a card that's watched by so many people? Did it feel a bit different from the usual cards that you're on?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a different experience than my last fight. You know, being a first fight and being on Fight Pass, you know, definitely an adjustment. But yeah, it felt great to get back out there, get in front of the crowd and do my thing. It was pretty intense. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Now, I wanted to ask you, Pat, I don't think anybody knows this, but when we had Dennis Bermudez on the show a couple of weeks ago, you were actually right there with him, funnily enough. What were you guys up to?
I was right there. That's why the interview was so good, because I was feeding him lines.
So technically, you've been on the show 3 times. What were you guys up to? Were you guys just hanging out?
Yeah, he came out. I think he came out 2 or 3 weeks before the fight. So he finished his camp with us in California. Just to kind of change of pace. You know, make sure he gets his paper exactly right. It has enough rest and is ready to perform. So he bunked up with me, and you know, I get to hang out with my little buddy for 3 weus there. It's pretty awesome.
Now, you know, you and Dennis, you guys have great personalities. Seems like you guys really get along great. Tell us a little bit about the build up to these fights. How did you guys go in training? What kind of relationship do you guys have? Do you ever play pranks on each other? And are there many gym shenanigans, as people say?
We have plenty of shenanigans. I mean, I think we did a bunch of videos up to the fight and after the fight, and you know, we did our fair share of joking around and having a good time. But I think that's really important. You know, having that dynamic is very important. Just because you got to be able to take the pressure off, but then at the same time get focused and ready to perform when you're ready to do it. If you start too soon, you get too serious, it can wear you down. You know, it's too much pressure to hold over a long period of time. So having Dennis there was perfect. And, you know, I like to think that, you know, you said we're both great personalities, but I think it's mostly me. And, you know, I really help Dennis. You know, a lot of what I do brushes off on him, and you know, makes him that likable guy. So I feel like we should be together at all times.
Now, when you were on Submission Radio last time, you actually made a prediction. You predicted that you were going to retire Kyle Kingsbury, and you did that. You did exactly that. Your prediction came true. So I guess the big question now, Pat, is what are this week's lotto numbers?
Well, see, I went 1 for 1 on my predictions, because I said I would finish it. And I don't know if you could tell, but I was a little pissed after the fight that I didn't get it. But you know, I did say I would retire, so I got that out of the way. So I'll go 50-50 on that exchange.
Now, you know, let's talk about the fight a little bit. You had a great performance. You were very dominant, but there were a lot of opportunities there for possible submissions to finish the fight. What was going through your mind throughout the fight? Did you think about possibly going for a few of those submissions, or did you want to sort of just see how it plays out and see what happens next?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I was definitely looking for a submission, but you know, some of my go-to submissions weren't really there. So, you know, rather than squeeze myself out or, you know, risk something like that, I just thought, you know, I'm dominating pretty well, and I felt like I was close to finishing the fight a couple of times. It was just, you know, it's just a matter of that last little bit. Maybe I need a little extra kick in my conditioning to be able to, you know, just keep that flurry and that storm together to finish the fight, you know, whether it's ground and pound or, you know, work on that submission. But definitely just I find myself in that position quite a bit. I think this next week I'm going to spend a lot of time on my ground game and really work on adding a couple of submissions to my game.
And did Kyle Kingsbury's attire at the weigh-ins have anything to do with throwing you off a little bit? Because it was quite a scene, what he was wearing at the weigh-ins this time around.
Right. You know, I immediately after the fight, Kyle, you know, he shook my hand and he said, "Man, great fight." He's like, "You know what? I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore. That's it for me." And I was like, "Man, you know," I just felt, I don't know, it kind of made me feel for him, you know, because he's a competitor and he wanted to put on his show and do, you know, to his very best, and I think he realized that it's not going to happen for him in the UFC, but at the same time it's nice when when a guy can move on and say, okay, I'm done with this part of my life, and go on to the next step. So I'm happy for him in that way, you know. And I definitely wish him all the best of luck. He was a great guy. I feel like we could have been pretty good friends if not for the fight.
Yeah. And, you know, it's a silver lining because in this sport, very few people walk away when they should walk away, or when a lot of people think they should walk away, and their careers end up, you know, really dragging, and they do damage to their body. But I was going to ask you, you know, yeah, how did that make you feel? Obviously, another professional fighter, you made him want to hang up his gloves, and, you know, people often see, you know, fights and MMA and fighters in general, you know, you want to get the knockout, the submission, you know, essentially you want to win the fight, and that means hurting a guy. But when you see a guy like Kyle Kingsbury, you know, hang up those gloves, and you know that he's not going to have any more of his career, and in part, you know, due to you, how does that make you feel?
You know, like I said, I think, and you mentioned it, you know, there is that silver lining because so many guys stay in the sport too long, and it seems to me that he's got something, you know, to look forward to. And he's ready to move on with the next step of his life, and that's always exciting. You know, no matter what you're doing. You know, when I made the transition from wrestling to MMA, I was just done with wrestling. You know, there was no, I couldn't think of wrestling. I didn't want to watch wrestling, but the thought of transitioning to MMA was, you know, kind of gave me new life, and really pushed me to, you know, to get to the next step. And you know, just like anything, you know, you have a new challenge in front of you. It gives you a little extra oomph that you can put more of yourself into it. So I'm not exactly sure what the next step for him is, but it seems like he's got something going on, and I'm really happy for him for that. Like I said, you know, not too many guys step out of the sport at the right time, or you know, on their own accord.
Absolutely. And, you know, I'm sure he'll be a part of the sport. So hopefully we'll still be able to keep in touch with him. And, Pat, that sort of reminds me of one day if me and Casper decided to give up hosting the show to do competitive netting. You know, when we get the show gets too much,
right.
We won't want to think of the show. We won't want to talk to people. We just want to do competitive netting. I'm not saying it's getting close, so listeners don't freak out. But in the future, who knows? Now, Pat, your preparation for this fight.
I need a scarf. Guys, I need a scarf.
Well, you're on the right show, man. We got you covered. Don't worry.
I live in California, but I'll wear a scarf year round if you guys make it.
Oh man, you don't know what you just gotten yourself into. We will get our Chinese factories to start making you a scarf straight after the show. Now, Pat, with the preparation for this fight, you know, you mentioned that in your second fight in the UFC, you had your first ever training camp. How was your second one, and how did you feel now that, you know, you've gotten your groove in the UFC?
My second one was, you know, twice as good as my first, especially because, you know, the succession of the camps were one right after another. You know, I had a week off, and then I got right into my next training camp. And, you know, initially we were a little concerned, like, you know, maybe it's too much, maybe we'll get a little burned out, but, man, I felt great. I felt like I picked up right where I left off from my last camp and was able to build on top of that. So I think what you'll see from me in the future is trying to stay active as much as possible. I really like this sequence of you know, take a week, relax, have some fun. You know, I just spent a day on a tuna boat, you know, today. So I'm getting my little vacation in, and then you know, then I want to get right back at it. So I'm not exactly sure what the next step is for me, who we're going to go after, but I'd like to know pretty quickly.
Wow, machine. Because I was going to say, this fight, I think you had 6 weeks in between your last fight and this one. You've had 3 fights in 5 months. That's a tough schedule. And obviously you want to get as much experience as possible. So in theory, if the UFC were like, hey, Pat, listen, in 6 weeks or 7 weeks, we're getting another guy for you, would you want to take a fight like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, you know, somebody else asked me about that, and I said, and they were wondering, you know, what's going on? How come you want to get all these fights in? I said, my clock is ticking, man. I've I spent 4 years getting into, before I got into the UFC, I had one fight a year. I want to have at least 4 fights this year, just, and just charge at this thing hard and make it happen. So, and also experience is my, the number one thing that I need more than anything else is just time in the cage. So, I want to get right after. Why not?
And I was going to say, it's well known that a lot of your opponents pulled out when you were on the indie circuit. And of course, it's tough to make a living off fighting when it's only every so often, and of course, get that experience. Do you think it hurt you at all to take so much time off from MMA in between fights when you could have, been gaining experience and getting a real head start?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I feel like I would have been a different fighter had I had four fights in 1 year, and then stepped into the UFC directly from there. I would have felt much more comfortable, because I mean, when you have a year off, and I think most guys will agree to this, it's like you got to go through that learning process all over again. Everybody talks about ring rust, and I mean, it's tough to really string your confidence together and a bunch of wins when they're that far apart.
Absolutely, Pat. And it's also interesting because there is a little bit of a thing happening in the UFC. Guys like Robbie Lawler fighting more often, guys like Donald Cerrone fighting more often, and we're finding that it's actually helping him stay in the game. So you've just mentioned that you'd like to get your next fight as soon as possible, and obviously there's some stories of you having some issues getting fights when you were outside the UFC because you were known as such a great fighter. I'm just wondering, how hard is it for your manager Ryan now to approach the UFC and say, hey, look, Pat is looking for a fight? Because obviously the light heavyweight division has a lot of names in there, but you're coming off 2 wins now, and there's probably a lot of people up in the division, probably in the top 20, in the top 10, that don't want to take the risk of fighting you because they're afraid of losing. So how hard is it for Ryan to approach the UFC and get a fight set up sort of in the time frame that you guys want? Is it sometimes a battle?
Yeah, I think we'll see that a lot more in the future. But I also think 205 is a unique weight class, and there's, I mean, I think the number of guys in the weight class are in the 20s or 30s, so it's a small weight class, and I think if you want to fight and you want to do well, you've got to take those fights. Sometimes that's the only option for you. So I don't foresee any real obstacles for the next fight. But I think we've kind of looked into it a little bit, and there's only a handful of guys that we could really challenge at this point. So given that the UFC will allow me to keep fighting in such quick succession, I think we can match up with someone fairly quickly.
Now, Pat, you're obviously a really skilled guy, but at the moment you're a bit of a dark horse in the light heavyweight division. In terms of goals, kind of an obvious one, but is it to become the light heavyweight champion? And what sort of time frame are you looking at to achieve something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of guys that fight just to, just for some recognition. They want to maybe break the top 10 and to, hang their hat on that. I want to be the champ, and more than anything, I want revenge against Daniel Cormier, and I think he has a great shot of taking the belt, and I'd love to kill 2 birds with 1 stone eventually, and take the belt from him and kind of avenge that loss. But I think realistically, by the end of the year, I'd like to be in the top 10, and next year I think I could be starting to challenge as long as I can have as many fights as I've had this year. I think I can really find myself in the hunt.
All right, well, let's have a chat about the championship. Jon Jones on Twitter, I think it was yesterday, said to Daniel Cormier, because they're supposed to fight UFC 178 now, 0 knows. I I can't wait to see the look on Daniel's face once he realizes that I'm nothing like Dan Henderson or Patrick Cummins. I mean, that's what he said. I don't think he was intentionally trying to put you down. But what do you think about a comment like that coming from Jon, about yourself?
I mean, I would probably make the same comment. I had an awful showing. But at the same time, it doesn't. I mean, the circumstance. He's not explaining the circumstances of that fight, and I think I actually like the fact that Jon Jones is looking at me like, like I was some kind of, pop up, quick one and done kind of guy. When realistically, I want to challenge for the belt. So if he's going to overlook me, that's great. Because it's going to catch up with him eventually. I may be the tortoise in this race, but he's going to fall down at some point.
And, you mentioned that, you want to fight Daniel Cormier again. You want to avenge that loss. And with all the craziness that happens in the UFC in the light heavyweight division, a couple more wins, you might see yourself propelled, to an eventual title shot. In your mind,
Yeah.
a dream scenario, would it be to possibly fighting Daniel Cormier for the title, winning the title, and avenging the loss at the same time? Would that be a scenario in your mind that you sort of would really want to happen?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest thing I have going for me is that's a story that people want to hear, people want to watch unfold. I was that underdog guy coming in. I kind of had the odds against me, but stepped up to the challenge. Didn't go my way, but I've taken the long road back to the top, and man, I mean that's a true Cinderella story, and I think people really like that. I think I played the underdog with my first fight, and I think the comeback story is 10 times as good.
Well, even Rocky lost in the first movie, and everybody likes a sequel. Now, Pat, we told everybody that you were coming on the show, and the fans wanted to ask you some questions, so we're going to ask you some of those, if that's okay.
Oh, great. I love it.
Alrighty. Renegade Wonder 1 asks, who is your favorite fighter to watch?
Oh, boy. I have a couple. I really enjoy Bobby Lawler. He is the most cool, calm guy out there, and I feel like I can learn a lot from watching him. He's so comfortable in there, and experience is obviously his strong point, and not to mention his style is exciting to watch. But another guy I really like too is Cub Swanson. I think he's really found his rhythm, and I'm excited for him. He's definitely a force.
Now, Pat, Derek 99 would like to know, you and Anthony would be a great matchup. What do you think about Anthony Johnson, and how do you think a fight between you two could play out?
You know what? After I saw Anthony's fight, I really, my coach and I looked at each other and said, man, I would like that matchup, because really for me, I think it's weathering the storm. He's an explosive guy, and we all saw what he did to Nogueira in just over a minute. So I think I can. I don't know what I can weather that storm, and I think conditioning is still his issue. I still think if someone pushes him hard, he's going to have those same problems that he used to have when he was making 170, and I'd like to be the guy to exploit that weakness.
And just quickly to follow up on that, because that's a very interesting one. We saw Phil Davis recently. He's another good wrestler who, really struggled with Anthony Johnson. How do you think you would do? You think you've obviously got a fantastic takedown and a lot of good takedowns. Do you think you'd be able to, input your wrestling game on him as well?
Yeah, I definitely think I can. Phil is a great wrestler, but he's we're very different wrestlers. I mean, it's sometimes very difficult for him to go out and get that explosive takedown that he needs. And whereas that's my strong point. And I think, you know, Phil, you know, when you get tangled up with Phil and get in a situation with him on the ground, you know, you can find yourself in a lot of trouble. You know, he's great control, and you know, obviously his striking is getting better, but I think just what he lacked was being able to apply that pressure and do it by, you know, taking it by force and not waiting for someone to make a mistake.
Now, Pat, Meast would like to know. He just wants to say that you looked great in your last fight, and Meast would like to know what your level is in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu right now.
Oh, I'm happy to say that I am a white belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu.
Wow!
But I'm a black belt in wrestling. So I think those two kind of. I think actually the wrestling kind of tops the Jiu Jitsu. So it doesn't necessarily equal out.
That's and of course.
But yeah, that's my favorite thing to tell people. I'm a white belt.
Good, wearing it proud. And of course, wrestling's a fantastic base for MMA anyway. So you know it can cancel out the BJJ.
You know,
yep.
Maybe my next fight, I'll come out in a gi with my white belt.
That would be awesome. That would be awesome. Well, you know, there's a lack of fancy entrances in the UFC. You know, Tom Lawler hasn't had a crazy one in a while, and like, you know, they only do it international shows. So I reckon that would be hilarious. That would be awesome.
I think if after you win your fight, if your coach comes up to you and gives you a white belt with one stripe on it, I think that the place would go off.
All right, Pat, we're going to do obviously something well known to you because you've done it before, the Submission Radio Tap Out round. We fire off a bunch of fun questions and you answer them pretty much with the first thing that comes to your mind. Are you ready?
All right, I love it.
All righty, first one's an easy one. What's the secret to a good takedown?
The secret to a good takedown is running your feet like a crazy person and having no hesitation.
Now, Pat, the word on the street is that you make the best pancakes in town. The Submission Radio team is invited to Pat's house for some pancakes. What kind of pancakes are you serving up? And we want to know the maple syrup, ice cream, and strawberry situation as well.
All right, well, first of all, it's not the best pancakes in town. It's the best pancakes on the planet. Now, I like to keep it, well, it's not real simple, but I like to do a quinoa, hemp seed, and chia seed whole grain pancake. I think it offers a lot in nutrition and taste.
That sounds.
You're not selling us on this pancake, Pat, I must say. It started off well, but no, yeah. Listen, I'm a healthy eater, so I'm just trying to convince everyone else that they should do the same. And I think if you didn't know that my pancake was healthy, you would probably think, wow, this is one of the best pancakes I've ever had. And then I hit you with it. Oh, it's all so healthy. And, you may faint. I don't know.
You'd be a good salesman, Pat. Also, next question. Next question. Here's something a lot of people want to know. What happened to your tooth? And is it some kind of hipster thing as a quest to be different?
You know what? I wish it was something that I tried. Actually, in 2004, so it's been 10 years. I've been 10 years toothless now. I was wrestling in the Olympic trials in the very first match. I took an elbow. I was kind of like coming around behind a guy, and he was a little stiff and elbowed me in the teeth and snapped it off. So, actually, it's funny. The rest of the tournament, I spent, my nerve was exposed to my tooth. I don't know if you guys know what that feels like. It's really, you breathe the air in, and it gets really cold, and it's very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I couldn't drink water, out of a water bottle, or I couldn't just drink out of a glass. So I was warming up, and I had a cup with a straw, and I would put the straw like way back into my mouth, so it was nowhere near my tooth. and that's how I would warm up for my matches and stay hydrated. It's kind of ridiculous.
Now, Pat, here's a revealing one. If we open Pat Cummins' browser history, what website is listed the most?
What is what?
What website is listed the most in Pat Cummins' browser history?
Oh, okay. What website? Man, I would say it's like probably my website, because I really like to go surf around. My website, I think, is very exciting. officialdurkin.com. And, I like to check out the store, maybe buy a couple of T-shirts. But I also shameless promotion.
You're like, ooh, I got another order. Better ship it off to him.
Ooh.
All right, good. Well, I guess we'll check out your website then. What was it again? Officialdurkin.com?
Officialdurkin.com. The place to be.
There we go. Now, speaking of clothes, what's the deal with these UFC uniforms, and why is Ronda apparently going to be the face of them? We think that you could be a spokesman for these UFC uniforms.
I think so too. I've done my share of amateur clothing modeling, so I'm ready to step up to the big leagues. And I really like the uniform. The way they're taking that, just because I think it's silly to get, to have to get these sponsorships, and I couldn't get a clothing sponsor, a short sponsor for my last fight, so we ended up making custom shorts and doing them ourselves, which I loved, but it just made things really difficult. So without having to think about that, I think the uniforms are the way to go. I don't mind. As long as they come in spandex, I'm cool.
And I was going to say, your shorts look great last fight. If you had trouble, you should have told us. We would have knitted you a pair, no problems.
Oh, right? Yeah, I could go with a little macrame short. Yeah.
Just think of Dennis Holman, but knitwear. It would look great. Now, Pat, grappling competitions. You mentioned that you're sick of wrestling. It's not something that you think about, but competitions like Metamoris and all the other big ones out there, could we see you compete in them in the future if it's a high-profile fight?
Oh, sure. I'd love to do that. I think it's just another way to test myself, and I think it would be pretty impressive if a white belt could pull off a victory at Metamoris.
I think that
would be a headline.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Here's another question. Why is there no reality show based on the adventures of you and Dennis Bermudez?
Well, I think that's in the works. I think the public is just now kind of realizing what kind of potential we have in that area. So I think with any luck in the next month or so, we should have an offer from some cable company, I'm sure.
Well, you know what? Now the cast was actually teed it up. The Submission Radio marketing department has come up with some potential names for your reality show with Dennis when it does happen. So we've got 4 options for you. You have to choose one. So when you're ready, I'll rattle them off for you. Okay.
Okay, I'm ready. Yeah,
this is very serious. There was a bunch of guys sitting around a table, and somebody was like, "Should we just call it the Pat and Dennis Show?" And they were like, "Okay," and then that's it. Okay, but anyway, here we go. So the first option is the Durkin and Menace Show. Okay, the Durkin and Menace Show. The second option is Communers Wild Adventure Hour. See what we did there? Communers Wild Adventure Hour.
That's pretty good.
Hold your laughter till the end, please, Pat. Number 3.
Okay.
Pancake and Gentleman's Comb Over Dynasty. All right. And number 4. Number 4 is Law and Order. Law and Order Naked Unicorn Unit. Okay, so there you go. So Law and Order Naked Unicorn Unit. Pat, you have to choose the best one, and this is very serious. The submission marketing team, there's a lot of hours that went into this, so they didn't do. And
anyone who suggested a bad name was immediately fired. So these are the cream of the crop. Which one do you choose, Pat?
Oh, okay. I'm gonna have to go with the hybrid name crossing of what was it?
Communes Wild Adventure Hour.
Cummins, yeah. I think that suits us the best.
I think it'd be fantastic.
But I'd have to ask him. Before I make a final decision, I have to ask Dennis and get his approval.
Oh, I don't know. Like Law and Order Naked Unicorn Unit just sounds so good, but we'll have to go with Communes. We might have to take Wild Adventure hour out in case the show does go for 3 hours an episode, but we'll have to talk about it a little bit closer as it comes. I will be a producer. I accept the role. But Pat, thank you so much for coming onto our show. Me and Casper had a great time with you, and we look forward to finding out when you'll be fighting next. And who you'll be fighting next. You've always got a home here on Submission Radio.
And if he doesnn spell it on Submission Radio, guys, don't forget to follow Pat Cummins on his Twitter, official Durkin, OFFICIALDURKIN, official Durkin on Twitter. And again, Pat, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, guys. As always, I love doing your show. You guys are a class act.
Awesome. We'll be doing another one soon. Thanks.
We haven't been called a class act in a while. Thanks, Pat.
This is Diego Sanchez, and you're listening to Submission Radio.
Our next guest has been kind enough to take out some time out of his busy schedule to come onto the show. He manages fighters such as Jason Hine, Nate Diaz, King Mo. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Mike Kogan stopping by on Submission Radio. Mike, thank you for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. And some of the news that came out recently is Paul Daly signing with Bellator. Now, Paul was on our show a couple of weeks ago. He was very instrumental in telling everybody that you had a big part with helping him figure out his visa issues in America. Can you let us know how is that all going along? And are you excited to see Paul joining Bellator as a part of Bellator?
Yeah, so Paul's visa was obviously done by an attorney, and there seems to be no issues. He was, as a matter of fact, as far as I know, his visa actually got approved, and they're just waiting on a few documents for him to gather in the UK, and then he's going to go schedule in his appointment and then be able to go and get it stamped in his passport. So there's no issues with his visa.
Oh, excellent. That's awesome. We're all excited to see Paul and Bellator. Obviously you got quite a few well-known clients. How exactly did the partnership between yourself and Paul Daly come along? And are you now officially his manager?
Actually, Paul Daly is friends with Mo. So, and Paul currently kind of manages himself. So Mo asked me, if I'd mind helping him out and get a deal done. And I said, sure, no problem. I don't know. So that's kind of how I hooked up with Paul.
That's very interesting, Mike.
And I was able to, Bellator was interested in him, obviously. He's fought for Scott before, in Strikeforce. So, he seemed pretty excited. I mean, he likes Scott and working with him, and I was just glad to help out.
Now, Mike, let's have a chat about Scott Coker. Obviously, he has taken over Bellator. You've mentioned that Paul enjoys working with him. What are your thoughts on the change, and is it a positive change? Do you believe Scott is a breath of fresh air for Bellator?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody disagrees on that. I mean, I don't think that part is a mystery. Scott is a long-time promoter. I mean, Scott's been doing this for 30 years. Promoting, being a successful promoter is just not something you come into. You know what I mean? It's just not. You can't just put an ad in like GoDaddy.com and be like looking for promoters, and a bunch of them show up. And that's evidenced just by, if you look at our sport and the amount of shows that have come and gone is ridiculous. I mean, it's so high. It's because most people think, if you get enough money from an investor and you just go find a bunch of people and some recognizable names and throw them all together to fight each other, and things are, going on hunky-dory from there. And that's just not true. Millions of dollars have been lost. So, Scott is a seasoned promoter. There's just not that many of them out there. So, obviously Viacom was interested in him, went after him, and they made a deal. So I think it's phenomenal. I think it's he hasn't even really even started to scratch the surface, of what the Bellator 2.0 is going to look like. I mean, that's going to take probably 2-3 years before you really start to see a monumental change. But even just starting with like just the September 5th show, you could already feel his footprint on the matchmaking and the posters and the positive media attention. I think it was one of the first events that Bellator has announced in recent history that I'm aware of where the MMA media wasn't skeptical about it, negative about it, judgmental about it. You know, they were very embracing, and that's just what a credible promoter brings to an organization right away. And that's what Scott did, right off the bat.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. Scott's definitely a very good promoter. I would say that's where the company really needs to go. And I just wanted to get your thoughts, because you've got a lot of experience in this industry. Obviously, Scott, he was a Strike Force prior. The company got bought out by the UFC. With Bellator, it's a bit of a different situation. It's owned by Viacom. Viacom's got massive power in that department. Do you think it's going to be a lot different in terms of as opposed to Strike Force with Bellator now? And do you think they're going to be around for a long time as opposed to being bought out by the UFC?
Well, obviously, that's a question for Viacom executives. I don't make the decisions to buy or sell companies on their behalf. But from what I understand, Viacom's goal is to be in a fight business. I mean, that's why they invested money into Bellator. That's why they bought Bellator. They didn't buy it as a weekend fob and just have a little fun and then let it go. They bought it to be in the fight business. And Viacom is a $40 billion company, so they obviously don't make purchases that they don't feel like are valuable or important to them or something that they want to stay in. And just logic will tell you, if you make a change and you get a new guy like Scott in there, and he's going to try to revamp the whole thing and turn it around, then your intention is to stay in the business, right? I mean, nobody goes through all the restructuring and the money it costs to get all this stuff done and then not be in this business long haul. So obviously, that's just from a logical standpoint. As far as the possibilities are endless. I mean, literally endless. Viacom owns so many different properties that can be dialed in and integrated together with the Bellator and really create a multi-platform environment where you have crossover stars and you have stars that are being promoted across multiple Viacom platforms. Viacom owns Paramount. I mean, the possibilities are endless. And the truth be said, if there is one guy that could really kind of see those opportunities and tap into those opportunities and create the kind of crossover platform and really take advantage of all that, that's Scott, because he has a very Scott's way of thinking is very unorthodox. Not in a bad way. It's just very unconventional. He thinks in multiple dimensions, and he's a visionary. He's able to see opportunities, able to create opportunities. So I think that partnership between his visions and his abilities and Viacom's resources, both financial and just media platforms, I think is a great opportunity. I think he could really build something special there.
That's a very good point, Mike. Now, I was wondering, obviously, Bjorn Rebney was the previous president of Bellator, and, King Mo, your client, in a couple of interviews, he said that he felt that Bjorn was a little bit biased towards Rampage. I was just wondering, how does King Mo feel about Scott Coker coming onto the company? Obviously, he's got a fight coming up at Bellator 123, as you mentioned, September 5th against Tom D. Blas. So, it's a big fight coming up. But how does he feel about Scott taking over the company? And for him, is he happy to see the change?
Yeah, he's beyond excited. The truth is, everybody's really excited. I have yet to meet somebody who's not excited about it. I think some people are more reserved in their comments than Mo is, or I am for that matter. But I have yet to meet anybody who's unhappy. It's a positive change. I mean, how could you be unhappy about it? Bjorn has left kind of a really dark footprint on Bellator, not just with us, but with many other fighters. I mean, I have, it's just the way he operated things, and whatever. He's just thing of the past now, so it really doesn't matter. Just move on.
And just in terms of Bjorn, do you believe what Kingmo was saying is true? Do you think he was biased towards some of the fighters more than other fighters in the organization when he was president?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I said it to Bjorn before Mo ever said it to anybody. Absolutely. Listen, it's one thing. We're all humans, and you're going to like some people more than you like some other people. But you're a promoter. Your job is not to push your friends and boys or whatever the flavor of the month you have. Your job is to promote fights. Your job is to promote your organization. You can't make it personal. I'm like, well, I don't like this guy anymore, so I'm going to stop promoting it. But I like this guy now, and I like that guy. And the truth of the matter is that we're getting into too much detail. All of those issues that people have had with Bjorn and all the weirdness and all the crazy stuff that went on, that was of his own making. Nobody else made it but him. You know what I mean? He was just a really short-sighted person. He only saw like 3 feet in front of him. And that was it. He didn't see anything beyond that. There was just so many things that a person should be doing in this industry that he wasn't doing. Relationships. 90% of MMA industry is all about relationships. Most of the business is all about relationships. And he would just create these environments where it's impossible to have a relationship, and it was just weird. It was just, I don't know. It was a little weird, to be honest with you. I've never met somebody this evil-minded. Like, he was evil-minded. Like, he would plot evil shit in his head. And you'd just be like, wow, how do you even think this kind of stuff?
Okay. Now, very interesting. And I was going to also ask you, obviously King Mo does have the fight. Just on that one, for everybody out there, it is September 5th, the Bellator 123, and he's fighting Tom DeBlas. How's training going so far for King Mo? How's he going, and how is he with preparation?
Yeah, training's going good. He started out in Vegas with Jeff, and he's now headed to Florida to ATT, where he does the bulk of his camp, actually most of his camp. And he's gonna, jump right in there. He's in shape, so he should be okay as far as just jumping right into the camp and going hard for the next 3-4 weeks, and then fight week, and that's it, and we're done. So it's going good. He's training. He's in good shape.
Now, Mike, we had Diego Sanchez on the show last week, and he was saying that his fight is against Nate Diaz. He'd love to fight Nick Diaz in Mexico, and he's saying that that's the fight that he thinks fans want. We're just wondering, how are the negotiations going with the UFC? Are you guys getting any closer to getting Nate in there, and are the talks still going ahead?
No, right now, nobody's talking to anybody. I mean, Dana made it very clear that, Nate basically should be happy with what he has, and he doesn't see any reason to even discuss it. He's not really as popular as I guess we believe he is. And that was that. We just kind of stopped there. So right now, no, nobody's talking to anybody.
I was going to say it's interesting because Nate's always been, an outspoken guy, and that's one of the things that makes him very popular with fans. And, there was, of course, that quote recently with Dana White where he said that he doesn't believe Nate moves the needle. And you had an interesting observation, and you made a point on Twitter about the numbers that Nate has drawn. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the numbers I put up are the numbers that have been announced. I mean, I didn't say anything different than what already been said. Dana said that Nate had the lowest rated fight in Fox history, which is not true. It was Demetrius Johnson. Nate's fight against Miller actually peaked at 3 million views on the same night that Mayweather was fighting, and Sugar Shane Mosley was on the undercard, which he's a named fighter, which means people are going to tune into that undercard fight, not just wait for Mayweather to hit. And on that night, on a Fox, he did a 3 million views with his fight. Now, he's not responsible for the rest of the card and the average that a show generates, but even the show did 2.4 million average, which was higher than the Demetrius Johnson fight did. So just statistically, that wasn't true. Now, whether those numbers are what they consider moving the needle or not, I don't know. But all I know is that it's right in par with all the rest of the shows, except for a handful of shows in the beginning that spiked and peaked really high. One of them was Rashad Evans, UFC on Fox 2, and the other one was the UFC on Fox 1, which is a debut. The rest of them have pretty much been floating around the same. I mean, just now, the latest show, which was a phenomenal card. I mean, it was a great card, great fight. Robbie Lawler fought Matt Brown in the main event. It was a great fight. It did $2 million overnight and did $2.5 million in total.
Yeah.
I mean, if he doesn't move the needle, and neither does anybody else in the UFC, so nobody else will be making any money. You know? So my point was, I just put out the numbers that have been released before, and said if he doesn't move the needle, then these numbers must not be impressive, or they must not move the needles. And then Cerrone did a fight with Miller. They were on FS1. I understand it's not the same number of viewers, because in the U.S., FS1 is available on like 83 million homes, and Fox is available on 125 million homes. But we're also talking about an average rating of 640. I mean, that's not moving the needle in my book. But anyway, I'm not a needle specialist, so I don't know. I just put out the numbers they put out, and then there was a video of Dana himself praising that Miller fight as being the great and hitting all the top demographics and doing this and doing that. So I just don't understand how at that time it was great, and now all of a sudden it's horrible. You know what I mean? So, let people draw their own conclusions. I mean, bottom line is, fighters have been cut for sneezing in the wrong direction. And here you got a guy, openly not wanting to fight and wanting to do this, wanting to do that, and he's still there. So obviously he must be moving somebody else, because otherwise they would have shit-canned him out of there. So I don't know. Whatever. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, those are some great points made by you, Mike. I was just wondering, obviously Dana tweeted a couple of things about you. They were a little bit personal, calling you a couple of things. Does that make talks difficult sometimes? Because obviously Dana is an emotional person sometimes and may say certain things. Does it make it difficult for you to then continue the relationship with him, and coming to a conclusion that's right for the UFC and Nate Diaz, obviously having to hear that kind of stuff from Dana?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're not really talking, so when we ever do talk, I'll tell you how it went. But, I doubt it. I mean, I don't know. I don't hold grudges. It's whatever, Dana probably holds grudges, probably doesn't like me very much. But what can I do? Nothing I can do about it.
So from a management perspective, I'm just curious, because if Dana White says that he's not going to speak to Nate Diaz for, say, the next 3 years or whatever the case is, would anything change, or would Nate just not fight?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think Nate wants to sit around for 3 years, so, I really don't know. I mean, this wasn't supposed to be, played out in the media. I mean, we tried to have private conversation a long time ago, and then, instead of having it, UFC started trashing Nate in the media and saying he's turning down fights and he's afraid and this and that and whatever, to which we responded. I mean, the truth of the matter is, if you go and you guys are journalists or I don't know, whatever you call radio people, go track down a single incident in which either Nate or I have said anything that was other than reactionary, anything that was proactively said. Nothing. Not once. You know what I mean? There's never been an interview or an article where, we're initiating a discussion with the UFC or over media as a medium of communication. Never. Always been reactionary. Our first reaction was when he got accused of being scared of fighting Khabib, when that's not true. You know what I mean? And then from there on, every time, either one of us says anything, it's always as a reaction to something that's already been said. It's never been proactive. So I don't know how we could be accused of, being this people that are, whatever, crazy, and we're out there in the media and trying to make a big deal out of it. We're not. I mean, listen, once this thing hits the media, it doesn't help anybody. Because now it's too public. Now it's like everybody's in the mix. You know what I mean? It's like everybody's there. It's like a family feud that turned out to, now it's on Jerry Springer. Now there's millions of eyeballs on it, and everybody's paying attention with the pooper scooper walking around who did what where. It makes things very complicated. You know what I mean? I didn't want to do that way. I had no intention of doing this. But if you're going to be out there trashing my guy, I mean, I'm going to say something. I'm going to just sit back and be like, oh, yeah, you know, we're so blessed to be breathing this air. I mean, whatever.
Yeah, of course, I can understand that. It's a very interesting situation, and I see it as a little bit of a double-sided coin. I want to get your opinion because, you know, on one hand, you know, Nate's putting his body on the line in one of the toughest, if not the toughest, sports in the world, and it makes absolute sense that he'd want to be paid fairly for what he's doing. You know, on the other hand, MMA, it's a young man's sport, and while Nate's not old, you know, he really seemed to be finding his groove and coming in his own. Do you have a fear that Nate might be sitting, you know, out during his prime, and that if he comes back too late, the cage rust might affect his chances of the title shot that he wants?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, like I said, you're not picking any new grounds here or tapping into things nobody's ever thought of. Obviously, Nate doesn't want to sit around. He's a fighter who wants to fight. But at the same time, you know, there are circumstances that led up to this conversation, which we feel are justified. They feel are not. But this conversation didn't just come out of the blue. Like, Nate just didn't just wake up one morning and say, hey, you know what, I'm just going to ask for more money and then just going to sit around and not fight. That's not how it happened. You know, there were conversations preceding to this, and there were circumstances under which the last contract got signed, and there were promises made. There's a lot of other factors that are basically nobody's business to be discussed, because, you know what I mean? But I don't want people out there thinking that this guy just woke up one morning and decided that, you know, he's just going to do this, that, and the other. You know what I mean? There's other conversations to be had. Whether they'll prove to be fruitful or not is irrelevant. But bottom line is, it was not our intention to end up discussing this in the media or having a conversation through the media. That was not the intention at all, but that's just how it turned out to be. Because it's really nobody's business. I mean, the bottom line is, people have a limited amount of information, and everybody jumps to conclusions and starts voicing their opinions, which is their right to do, but they don't know the whole story. They just, you know, and some of the stuff you read out there, and I'm like, wow, it's like, how dumb do you think we are? Do you think we're there retarded? Like, I need some farmer from Wisconsin telling me how to do my job? Like, relax, dude, chill. I know what the hell's going on. You know what I mean? It's like, but people don't have the entire information, and they shouldn't. It's none of their business. I mean, you know what I mean? We're not discussing this piece in the middle where the whole world needs to be involved in it. This is a private matter, which was dragged out into public, not by us. So, you know, I don't know. It's a complicated situation. At some point, hopefully we will have some kind of a discussion, and something will happen one way or the other. Now, that being said, we have offered a number of fights that we were happy to take, even with the current structure, but we weren't given those. I reached out to the UFC before the Donald Cerrone Miller fight even happened and said, hey, how about we fight the winner? Nate beat both of them. They're both since fought 4 times and won, you know. And they said, oh, well, you know, let's see how the guys are after the fight. Maybe they were banged up, maybe they're not. And next thing you know, they announced the fight with Khabib. And Khabib blows his knee like 15 minutes later. And now they're saying he's going to be fighting Eddie Alvarez, who's, you know, not even signed with the UFC yet. You know, we asked for that fight when Michael Johnson got injured. We hit up the UFC, said, hey, we'll fight Thompson. I was like, 10-day notice. He said, you know, maybe ask them if they'll do like a little higher weight, like catch weight, like, you know, 160 or something. So, because it's like it's a short notice. And I said, nope, we haven't figured it out. Don't worry about it. So he's not just sitting out there and going, you know, I don't want to fight anybody. He's just, you know, we just don't want to fight up-and-coming young guys and have people build their name off of Nate for the money that he's getting paid. You know what I mean? And I really, to be honest with you, this is why I really don't care what the public reaction is about. I've had, you know, I have some managers that are friends, and I think I should really open up and talk to the media, and then that way the fans can get behind. Listen, MMA fans are like the most flip-flopping weirdos I've ever met in my life. They're either they're sitting around and bitching about fighters not making enough money, and UFC being so greedy, and blah 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 blah. And as soon as the fighter starts saying the same thing, then they're like, "What are you talking about? You make plenty of money. You have a contract. Just shut up and go fight." So they're just MMA fans are just haters. So no matter what direction you go in, they'll always go the opposite direction. You know what I mean? So why would I need to worry about what they think and be like, "Oh, you know what? We need to go out there and win their hearts." You can't win their hearts. They have no hearts. They have no brains either. They just swing whichever way the wind blows. I'm not talking every single one of them. I mean, there's a lot of people that have texted, emailed and tweeted us, and supported Nate, and I thank them for it. But a big majority of people, it's like they're sitting out there bitching about fighters not getting paid enough money, and as soon as fighters start bitching about not getting paid enough money, they're like, "What are you talking about? You shut up, make plenty of money. You should just go out and fight and stop bitching." And I'm like, what is wrong with you? You know what I mean? And you have fighters out there that are just saying dumb shit. It's like, listen, why would you say something dumb shit like this? Like, oh, if you want to make more money, you should just fight more often. Can you imagine an athlete saying that? Like, can you imagine somebody in the NFL sitting down to renegotiate a deal, and a fighter and a player coming out and going, well, you know what? You should play every game, and then you'll get paid more. No, I'd like to get paid more. Doing the same amount of work, like working overtime. That's just so stupid. Like, where do you even get this logic? You know what I mean? Like,
absolutely. Absolutely.
Like maybe I'll go join another. Like maybe I'll go join another NFL, like AFL league or Canadian Football League in the off season so I can make more money. Like, no, that's not how it works. So if you want to be taken as a respectable sport, then it's a two-way street. Like, you can't just nitpick the things you want and be like, okay, we're like NFL here and here and here and here, but when it comes to this, well, this is different. It's just dumb. But for a fighter to actually go out there and say that, I mean, there are fighters out there, like Cowboy, and he's all like, oh, they can just sit around and bitch all at once. I'll just keep fighting every 2 days and make all the money in the world. Why would you want to do that? If you can make the same amount of money fighting 3 times a year. I mean, do you really enjoy getting punched in the face that much? Like, it's just, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. So, to sit around and basically worry about what everybody else says, it's counterproductive.
Absolutely, Mike. And, we really appreciate your honest opinion, and this is very, very interesting stuff. And just before we get off, Nate, just finally, if the fight was proposed to fight Diego Sanchez, say, in Mexico, would that be a fight that you and Nate would be interested in? Obviously, that would be something the fans would want to see, and ideally, would that be a fight that you guys would be interested in?
Well, here's the thing. I don't know. I mean, I have never voiced my opinion on an opponent without talking to Nate because it's him the one fighting. But in my book, Diego Sanchez got handed a gift against Ross Pearson. I mean, he lost that. Stevie Wonder saw that he lost that fight, but somehow they handed him a decision. Before that, he already lost to Gilbert, and he's not even ranked in top 10 at a lightweight division. Nate, until he got booted out of there, was ranked number 5. So, I mean, what does fighting Diego Sanchez do for Nate? Nothing. So that's his point. Start paying me the money where I don't give a damn who I fight. I just go fight whoever you want. We won't fight Diego Sanchez. That's what the fans want, and that's what this guy wants. And I'll go fight him. Because you go fight Diego Sanchez and you beat him, and then you try to use that as an accolade, and people go, "What are you talking about? He's not even ranked." Like, shut up. You know what I mean? That's just how this industry is. So, from that standpoint, what sense does it make? It makes more sense to go fight Donald Cerrone, whom you've beaten before, and is now out there, on a 4-fight win streak with 4 finishes, which is great. You know what I mean? Oh, hell, even Miller, who just lost, but he was on a 4-fight win streak. But at least he's ranked. You know what I mean? So you beat him and you keep your ranking, or maybe you go up one ranking. What's beating Diego Sanchez going to do for you? He's not in ranked. Right? So I don't know. But at the same time, it doesn't really matter. I mean, that's the whole point. Like, Nate fights, and fans love to see it. You know what I mean? And if that's the fight that fans love to see, and he doesn't mind doing it, and he's getting compensated for it, then he'll go fight Diego Sanchez in Mexico, or Guatemala, on the moon, wherever. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with what you're saying, Mike. Definitely. Also, just wanted to ask, Jason High, he's another one of your guys, and he was obviously in the news not too long ago as far as a referee incident, and a lot of people thought that the punishment was too severe. We had John McCarthy on the show, thought the same thing, and that's coming from a ref. Just wanted to know, we heard that there was an appeal lodged. Are there any updates on that appeal, and how's Jason doing, just in general?
No, the appeal is we went through the process. And the appeal date itself is August 12th. So we're going to call in to the commission during their meeting and, see what happens.
Well, that's fantastic, and hopefully that goes well. And now, Mike, before we let you go, we just wanted to get your thoughts. Obviously, Nate's brother, Nick, he's just been signed back to the UFC. What are your thoughts on Nick being put in the octagon with Anderson Silva straight away? And is it something that could possibly lead to Nate coming back, Nick being back with the UFC?
Well, I mean, Nick, from what I know, and I wasn't there, but from what I know, Nick made a 3-fight deal, a new 3-fight deal. He basically waived the contract that he had, and he made a whole new contract with 3 fights in it, because he had a bunch of fights left on his contract. But since he moves needles, I guess it's worth renegotiating. So they sat down and redid his deal. And he has a 3-fight deal, and his first fight is against Anderson Silva. It was a great fight. I mean, who doesn't want to see that?
Mm.
You know what I mean? It's an awesome fight. I mean, that's what fighting is about. It's watching people that are exciting and 2 guys that are good at what they do, fighting. In these fan dream fights. So yeah, I think it's great. I hope he gets paid a lot of money. He deserves it. He's been fighting for forever, since he was 17. He's 30, so 12, 13 years.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, as far as MMA fans go, you can't really ask for much more. And, even the most unhappy MMA fans have got to love that one. But look, Mike, we just want to thank you for coming on the show. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Guys, don't forget to check out Mike Kogan on Twitter. It is Mike Kogan. And, of course, King Mo fighting at Bellator 123 on September 5th against Tom DeBlas. Mike, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks.
Hey, this is Alistair Overeem, and you are listening to Submission Radio.
All right, guys, our next guest is a former WEC champion, a former Strikeforce champion, a former UFC champion, and he embodies the word legend like not many other people. He owns the fastest win for a title fight in an MMA fight. He is none other than Frank Shamrock. Frank, welcome to Submission Radio.
All right, thanks for having me.
Oh, by all means, it is our pleasure to have you on the show. Now, let's get straight to it, Frank. The trailer for Gym Rescue is out. It's on Spike TV. The show looks intense, and we see you got shoved by an angry gym owner. Tell us about the show and why are you getting shoved? What happened?
Well, it seems like I'm always getting shoved for some reason, but so, when Randy and I started doing this Gym Rescue show, we really found out that a lot of the gyms in America, a lot of the businesses in America were just not, focused on the business side, and we're seriously lacking in processes and systems and marketing and that stuff. So, I got quite a bit of experience on that. So when it came down to it on the show, they just asked me to, set them straight. So I did. And, man, I got pushed a few times. I think every episode somebody lit into me.
And was there a gym on the show where you and Randy rocked up and it was just so unbelievably badly run that you guys were just like, wow, we've never seen anything like this before? Because you guys have been across a lot of gyms in your career. Did you have a moment like that on the show?
No doubt. Yeah, Randy and I have been all over the world, and we've shot, TV shows and movies together and trained for fights and everything. But, there was a gym in Denver. There was an all-girls gym. And it was literally like everything was pink. And there was like a woman running it who was just like woman powered out and kind of man-hating on the whole like man vibe. And it was really challenging, to go in and talk business because they had a whole other perception, a whole other vibe towards men in general and fitness in general. And it was really weird. But, at the end of the day, we were able to go in and really, really help them. And, I hope they kept the lessons we taught them and were able to survive and hopefully prosper.
You guys are going to be like the next Ramsey Kitchen Nightmares, where you come back in like 6 months and you see if it's still happening. But I wanted to ask you, you know, when this guy shoved you, what was it like? Was it angering to you because someone's shoving you, or was it kind of like, you know, you've been shoved by much bigger and, you know, more dangerous guys who didn't really fuss you that much?
Well, it's just really frustrating for me because, you know, one of the reasons why, you know, I was getting shoved is, you know, I was really explaining to them the core of business and sort of, you know, helping to guide them along. And what, you know, I'm a pretty good teacher. I'm a pretty good instructor. I've taught martial arts for years, and I'm really patient. But, you know, like a lot of these guys are in the business not to make money, but to hang out with their friends or to, you know, to hang out with the fitness community. So a lot of them just take huge offense to learning the facts about their business. And, you know, business is ones and zeros, it's X's and O's. You know, you do what's necessary to make money. That's what business is about. But a lot of these people are just, they're clueless. They want to have a world that's their own, and they don't want anybody messing with it.
And, you know, Frank, me and Casper, we've been through a whole bunch of gyms ourselves, and we've been in some really dodgy ones. This one time I was on this one machine, and it came crashing down on my hand because it was an old machine. Did you guys walk into any gyms and just had a look at some of the equipment there, and were just blown away by, you know, some of the safety hazards, some of the, you know, the old rusty machines, you know, the fact that you know, it wasn't really that safe for members? Did you guys run into any of those?
For sure, yeah. From the first gym to the last gym, there was, you know, equipment that wasn't cared for, or equipment that just wasn't serviced or maintenance properly. And then, you know, our second gym was this crazy guy named Craig who actually made his own equipment. And it was crazy dangerous. Like, he had this stuff strung from the walls, and he had weird pulleys, but it was not at all safe. And yeah, you know, it's funny because these guys have the, you know, greatest intentions in mind, but when you hand make your own equipment, it's like, you know, held down with duct tape. You know, safety is just not, you know, it's just not paramount. It's not how you help people in the long run.
Yeah, we're picturing a guy similar to Kramer from Seinfeld.
And I was wondering, Frank, obviously, you know, Randy's got his door gym system where if you've got a door, you've got a gym. Is there ever at any point where you walked into a gym and it was just a whole bunch of doors with Randy's door gym system on there? And then Randy, what's Randy going to say about that? He can't criticize the system. If you got a door, you've got a gym, right?
Yeah, I think that's the finale of after we get multiple seasons. You just go into a giant hallway, and there's one on every door. And it's just like, all right, we're done. We're done, America. No, it was, you know, what's funny is everybody, especially like Craig and these gym owners, they have their own little vision of what fitness is. And, you know, when you plug that into business, sometimes it just doesn't make sense. You know, and the members are like, yo, we're not, it just doesn't make sense. So that was the hardest part for me, was to sit down and, because I had to be the bad guy, to sit down and be like, look, it's not working, and this is the reason why. And for whatever reason, everybody wants to fight, you know, the truth because it sucks. But, you know, that's what it's about.
Yeah, of course. Now, obviously, you're doing this show, Gym Rescue, and, you know, this is obviously after a very, very accomplished MMA career and fighting career. But let's take a trip back in time to '94. You know, there was something about MMA that, you know, drew you towards it. What was it that made you want to be a part of it, and how much was your brother Ken's influence a part of the motivating factor?
Well, Ken was my first trainer and teacher and mentor. So, you know, without him, I would have gone nowhere. But, you know, in truth, my interest was I wanted to live at home rent-free. And, you know, my dad told me the only way I could do that was to have some sort of job. And the only jobs were, you know, wrestling with my brother and then, you know, picking grapes or doing, you know, manual labor where I was living. So I showed up at the gym. I never imagined what it would entail or, you know, how it would capture my life or, you know, what I would become by way of being in it. I just wanted to not pay rent and live at home.
That's right.
I was going to say the dream, but you did forget to mention one other option for your career, and that was stripper. Now, it's something that rarely gets mentioned. Did you actually consider it for a second?
I did, fully. But, you know, I was a kid from the streets, and I never had a lot of experiences in life, but I'd read a lot. And I was really smart. I was really educated, at least when it came to books and stuff. So, I mean, I got it. I was like, wow. You know, I've been lifting weights for years. I'm a good-looking guy. You know, I'd grown my hair out. I was like, I could make some money off of this. And my dad was all in support of it. He said, yeah, you know, you have an asset, you know, go out and shake it. But I was too nervous, and I would have never felt, you know, comfortable doing that. But it was something, yeah, it was something I considered for a minute.
And you know, we've still got friends trying to become strippers over here, you know, and they have money, so you know, it's quite a good profession, especially with Magic Mike coming out now. Let's go back to 1994. Now we're in December 16th, 1994, and you've got your first fight, and it's against none other than Bas Rutten. Take us back to that experience. This was Pancreas. Take us back to your experience. What was it like stepping in the ring for your first fight, and especially with such a highly regarded fighter like Bas?
Well, it was just crazy because, you know, I didn't know the boss was that good, and nobody had really explained that to me. And, you know, I'd only trained for about 6 months before I went to Japan, and I was told, yeah, you're going to fight Boss, and that's in about 3 weeks. And so the whole thing really, you know, kind of came on me quickly, and I didn't really even get it until, you know, halfway through the fight. But I was very lucky when I got to Japan that Minoru Suzuki took me under his wing, and, you know, I kind of showed him what I knew, and he's like, takedowns, and he taught me to take down, and he kind of walked me through, like, what was important. And, you know, Ken was a great trainer and was a great mentor, but he had a whole different vision of fighting because he was a great wrestler, and I just wasn't. So I was terribly afraid, but I just kept moving from position to position and fighting my butt off, and, you know, luckily when it ended, I had a broken nose. I felt like I'd kind of won, but, you know, luckily the judges felt like I did.
Now, you and Bas, you had a couple of crazy fights. Actually, one of them so crazy and entertaining. If anyone hasn't watched it, definitely go out there. It was one of the most entertaining MMA fights ever. It was, you know, as the guys that used to be massive wrestling fans, it really embodied that pro wrestling spirit. There was a lot of people that speculated the fight was a work. Not that it was. There was one moment when Bas was hitting you in the face. I think you guys were like in a 50-50 position, and you were making faces and mocking him. Can you tell us about that fight and what was going through your head during that fight?
Sure. Well, that was, I think, the second time we met.
Yeah.
And unlike the first time where I was, you know, super hungry and focused and great vascular conditioning, the second time around, I really felt like I had Bas figured out. So I was like, I don't really need to train that hard. You know, I just need to do X, Y, and Z. So the problem with that is he came even more prepared, you know, after the first fight where I beat him. So after about 5 minutes, I got tired, and I ran out of strategies. And I was literally going through my list of strategies. And I just remember a boss being very vocal and being very sensitive about things said in the ring and, you know, actions and all kinds of stuff. And for whatever reason, right at that moment, I was like, wow, I have no way to win this. But if I could get him to foul me or hit me or lose his temper, I bet you I could get a point, and I could ride this thing out. And so that was my strategy. So I tried to get him as mad as possible, and I mocked him and stuck my tongue at him. And I can't remember the stuff I was telling him. But eventually he just balled up his fist and just plowed me right in the face. And that was my, you know, we were halfway through the fight, and that was my strategy. I was going to hang on and, you know, bob and weave and dance and move and hopefully not get hurt and get out of that fight, you know, with a point.
And, you know something, Frank, you know, Pancreas, you know, it's a legendary organization, and it must have been a crazy time back then, you know, being a part of, you know, something so special. What was it like being in Pancreas? Obviously, you know, people know the UFC of this day, Bellator of this day, but what was it like being in an organization like Pancreas back in the day?
Well, it was really neat because I was a young man, so all of the experiences were very new. And then, you know, the Japanese culture of business and the Japanese culture of taking care of athletes is one of respect and discipline. So, you know, I really felt like, you know, I was appreciated as an athlete and as an entertainer and as a fighter. And that was a unique thing. You know, I mean, here we got fans, but over there, like, you know, there were super crazy fans. And as a young man, it just really bolstered me. And I just really loved the whole experience of fighting in Japan, because you literally leave this country, go to another country like a rock star, you go crazy, you come back, you're like a normal guy again, but you still have that rock star experience that just happened, and that happened to me for years and years and years.
And, we get a lot of guys on the show who obviously were in Japan. We had Bob Sapp a while back, and he was telling us crazy stories about, the woman jumping on a car naked when he was in a taxi. You're in Japan, good-looking guy, aesthetic look. Did you have any crazy fan experiences or stories?
I had so many crazy fan experiences and stories, and, I didn't get it for the first couple of years, but after a while I was hanging out, and one of the old-time pro wrestler guys, one of the beautiful Japanese women had come up and presented her card, and I go, "Oh, nice to meet you," and I took her card, and he goes, "Hey, let me see that card." And I show it to him, and he goes, "Hey, that's a personal card." He goes, "Call that number." And I go, "Why?" He goes, "She's probably waiting around the corner for you." I go, "No, she's not." I call the number. She's like, "Hi, yes, I'm around the corner." Yes. And I'm like, "Oh my goodness!" So just like a totally different mindset and experience over there with women and sexuality, and that to me was, I was in a little country town, so I was pretty blown away just by the openness of it all. And then, I worked for the Yakuza for years, so we could go anywhere and do anything. If there was a circus in the middle of Tokyo, we were there, watching it in the middle of Tokyo. So there was, the Japan years were just crazy.
And, obviously, you had such a great time in Japan, but another huge organization in Japan was Pride. Did you ever have an opportunity to go over to Pride to fight, or did you ever have the temptation to fight some of the big stars over in Pride and, measure yourself up with the likes of Anderson Silva or Sakuraba or anything like that?
Yeah, I had a contract on the table with Pride to fight Sakuraba, and we went back and forth for years. And at the time I was the top guy in the world, and he was the top guy in the world, and I thought for sure it was going to happen. But yeah, it didn't. That was my one experience with Pride, and it was right when they were trying to get into the U.S. and really make some expansion moves. My focus was to fight Sakuraba and pretty much anyone else who came along. But the deal breaker was they wanted me to fight anybody within 15 days, within 15 pounds of my weight class. I was like, well, that doesn't sound good. 15 days, I gotta make a movie. I can't. That doesn't, doesn't work out for, like real, planning and stuff. So it eventually fell apart because of that.
Classic Pride. Now, obviously in '97, you joined the UFC. Your first event ever was in UFC Japan, funnily enough, when you won the light heavyweight title. Now, seeing your brother in the UFC 3 years ago, did it feel good to finally be in the organization? Take us back to what it was like being in the UFC, before the huge boom of MMA.
Well, it was pretty amazing because it was still like that, wild west of UFC time where, we were going around like peeking at outfits and, looking at guys' black belt rankings and trying to figure out like, what his skill sets would be. And it was just really primitive knowledge about, what the opponent knew or what the group knew. So that part was really scary. But to be involved in the development of that and to see all that come along, and it was pretty amazing. And I mean, we were in, fairgrounds. Like we were in, they'd have hockey the night before and we'd be rolling out the next night. There'd be water on the ground and stuff. Like it was really, kind of the grassroots, you had to love it to kind of be there thing. And it was neat to see the growth, especially with network television and at the local level and just where it's gone from. I mean, it was pretty hardcore back then.
And, the UFC is still struggling to make a name for itself in Japan. Obviously, you've had so many great times in Japan. You're a star over there. What do you think the UFC needs to do to really get the fans' attention in Japan and, make the same statement like Pride did back in the day or like Pancreas did back in the day?
Well, I think they need to start from the bottom and rebuild it. And I think that's what they've done with their recent reality shows, with the promotions in Japan. And that's, to create some type of vehicle to promote sort of the next generation. And, back when I was fighting, we were on network television, so you could put somebody on TV 3 times and everybody would know who he was. So it was just a different vehicle to building stars and promoting fights. Bob Sapp was on, was one of the biggest stars ever because he was consistently on network television to where every single person in Japan could see him at the click of a button. And we need to rebuild that model in Japan. We got away from that when Pride fell apart and when everything fell apart because we lost network support. We got to get that network television support back. And I think with a good reality show and a good, view of what the sport could be and should be, I think we'll get that network support back.
Mm. And now, speaking of the UFC, obviously your last appearance for the company was in '99 against Tito Ortiz. Crazy fight. We were watching Bound by Blood the other day, and I think it was Luke Thomas who was saying, it was the true rope a dope. And, you won the fight. You won Fight of the Year honors for '99. You mentioned it was one of the toughest fights in your career. We love hearing about this one. Tell us about what this one meant for you.
The Ortiz fight?
Yeah.
Wow, it was just really the culmination of myself as an athlete, when I was young, sort of the first generation of Frank. I learned about my brand and what I needed to do for the future, and I was a young guy. I spent most of my time incarcerated and in trouble with the law, so I just didn't know any of this stuff. But by the time I fought Tito, I had, a good entertainment lawyer, and I was a member of SAG, the Screen Actors Guild. So I had all these, avenues to sort of, go to the next level. And, yeah, I totally hatched this plan. I was going to fight Tito. I was going to retire and get out of my contract. I was going to move to Hollywood and be like a movie star. And I had this total crazy plan in mind. And I just trained my butt off. And, fighting Tito at that time, he was like 225, maybe 228. And I was probably 191 pounds.
Wow.
So I knew hanging out with him and, wrestling with him a few times and sparring with him that he was just the next size guy. And I'd have to really, become that super athlete that night. And that was the night where I just sort of put everything together and I was able to, become a super athlete in a sport where super athletes hadn't arrived yet.
And just to follow up on that one, you had a pretty crazy and daring plan, much like Homer Simpson in The Simpsons against Drederick Tatum. You basically wanted to tire Tito out and then finish him late in the 4th and 5th rounds. It's a pretty daring plan. Do you ever think back, if it didn't work out perfectly, it might not have worked out? And, how close do you think that plan was to, possibly falling through?
It was a 70-30 plan. There was a 70% chance I was going to be able to pull that off. You know what I mean? And because of the experience that I had in Pancrase and because what I knew about Tito's style, what I knew about his gas tank, and I knew if I could bob and weave and run the horse for 20 minutes, the horse would crash and then I could do what I wanted. But yeah, he cut me in the 3rd round, real good, like 16 stitches in my head. And if he could have got to that more, and he stuck his fingers in and even pulled it apart at one point. If he could have got to that more and got me to bleed more, and it went to the judges' scorecards or they stopped it and made a decision, I was losing on every scorecard. Because my game was to have him beat on me and move around until he was totally exhausted and then turn it on and try to knock him out.
And, knowing Tito so well and, he had such a great career. What are your thoughts on Tito now? Do you think that fighting on in Bellator is a good option for him? Or do you think that it may be time for Tito to start thinking about wrapping things up, going in a different direction? He had such an amazing career. Obviously, he had some tough fights near the end of the UFC career. Now he's in Bellator. What do you think about Tito's career at the moment?
Well, I don't know how he's still going, because at 40, everything starts to fall apart. But he seems to have found a new leg of longevity. He obviously loves what he's doing. It totally inspires him, much like it did when he was a kid. So I don't know. Some people get a late push in life, and especially in their career. He seems to, have gotten one of those, and he seems to be invigorated by it. He looked terrible the last few years. But hey, if he keeps winning, that's the thing, is if you're winning and you're building something or you're building a bigger vision that's important, then you should keep fighting. If you're getting your butt kicked and you're destroying your brand or you're destroying your body or your brain, then it's time to hang it up. And I just don't know where he's at on that.
Well, just speaking of the brand, he's a big part of Bellator, and, obviously you do a great job in Bellator as well. I was just thinking, obviously Scott Coker has just stepped in. Bjorn Rebney was the president of the company. Now he's gone. What did you think of the direction that Bjorn was taking the company? And what are your thoughts on Scott taking over? Do you think it's good for the brand, and do you think it's going to take Bellator to where it needs to be?
Well, first, I think it's great for the brand that Scott took over. And, not that, Bjorn didn't have a great idea and was going down a great course, but I think getting trapped in that tournament, sort of traps him to creating stars. And the sport's about stars. And if you get a guy who, turns it on and wins the crowd and loses, that's just part of the story. He shouldn't be penalized and have to go back through and, fight X, Y, and Z. And, a guy that wins the crowd, it's like the gladiator days. If you win the crowd, you get to go to the next level. And I think that's what good promotion and entertainment is about. The tournament kind of locked talent into that. And for me, it was always about the story. Who's the opponent, what's the story, and how does that go to the next story?
And I wanted to ask you, obviously, you and Scott Coker, you guys go way back to the first Strike Force in the San Jose days. Obviously with Strike Force, it got bought out by the UFC. What do you think is going to be different this time in terms of Bellator and Scott Coker, sort of taking to the next level, and obviously Viacom's, backing Bellator without being worried about being taken over by the UFC?
Well, I think the difference this time is, before we were literally a startup, like it was five of us. And that's where it started. We did everything, we thought of the stories. Now you got a multi-billion-dollar company behind you. And I think it takes a little bit longer to get the stories, lined up and everybody in agreement with them. But, now the opportunity and the vehicle is so much stronger. We were always in the point like, okay, let's do this fight, but wow. Is that the bill? What do we do about that? It wasn't until, we really got our big partners with the Silicon Valley Sports Group and the investors from Silicon Valley, that we were able to make the big purchases like Henderson and, Fedor and stuff like that. But, until then, we were a small company. Now, Coker and Bellator, they got a billion-dollar company and one of the most successful promoters in the business with a proven track record. I think their success is imminent.
Well, let's go back to those Strike Force days. Obviously, your fight with Kung Lee was huge for Strike Force. Going into that fight, I think a lot of people knew, and you knew, that you had an advantage over Kung in the submission wrestling department, but you chose to stay on your feet to make the fight more exciting for fans. And it was one of the most exciting fights, that Strike Force ever had. Looking back on that fight, is there anything that you regret from that game plan? Would you have done anything different, or would you have done anything over in that fight?
Well, I definitely wouldn't have stood up and did the one-arm crazy block that got my arm broken. But yeah, I was in a weird position because I was the main event, I was the spokesman, I was kind of all things at that time. So, when it came time to, writing what the story should be, with CBS in the front row, I did what I knew would be the most exciting and entertaining. And honestly, I just never thought my arm would break. And my coach told me, Maurice Smith was like, "You're going to break your arm." I'm like, "No one's ever going to break my arm. What's wrong with you?" So that was one of my lessons in martial arts, where I was like, wow, I'm literally not invincible. Because my plan was to stand up with him, exhaust him in the stand-up, and then knock him out, at his game. And I felt like everything was there for me to do that in that moment until my arm broke. And then I felt like I need morphine, I need to lay down.
Of course. Listen there, if you're going to block a kick, use both arms. And of course your final opponent was Nick Diaz. Another classic fight. What was it that made you want to retire after the Nick fight? And also, sort of two-part question, what are your thoughts on the big matchup that Nick has announced with Anderson Silva?
Well, I'm super excited about the Silva fight. I think they're both at the time in their career where only the biggest, moments matter, like I was in the last 10 years of my career. This fight needed to happen, so I'm super excited about it. And fighting Nick Diaz, I knew it was time. It was a risk. It was time. I knew that I needed to fight somebody very relevant. I knew Showtime needed a huge event. It was one of those other moments where I was like, I got to go to the next level here. But my body just wouldn't keep pace. And every time I got, to floor it. And every time I tried really, really hard, things were just popping and breaking. And I went into the fight broken. And then after the fight, it was just, this fight was the only time where I turned the switch and nothing happened. It's the only time ever, no matter how broken or jacked up, where I went like, oh, here we go, and nothing happened. And I thought it was a fluke. So, I went back, I re-strengthened everything, and I tried again, and my body just wouldn't hold up. And that's when I knew. I was like, wow, the car's broken. It's time to park it. Time to, find a nice garage and push it in there.
And when pushing your car in the garage there, Frank, was it difficult? Obviously, you're one of the pound for pound best fighters in the world. There's still so many fighters out there that you could potentially want to fight, such as Anderson Silva or some of the guys in the UFC. How difficult was it to just, admit to yourself that, it's time to move on, push the car in the garage? And, how hard was it initially, those first few months, making the transition from being a fighter to an actor, interviewer, an entrepreneur?
Probably, or most definitely, the hardest thing in the world. Just because, I know on a good day my body will do, all kinds of stuff. I know I can watch fighting and tell you, what's going to happen, who's going to win. But, my body wore out, and I can keep pushing it. But it's not worth it anymore. I got a little 6-year-old daughter, my little girl, and I remember the day when I couldn't pick her up, because of my back and my knee and my shoulder. I was like, wait a minute, this is not how I want to remember, her childhood or, my life at this point. It's time to stop. I can keep going, but what's the value and what's it going to bring to my life? And, I had a good career. I accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish, and, I'm good.
Mm. And in hypotheticals, had you continued fighting, and who knows where your career would have taken you. A fight between you and Anderson Silva would have been amazing. Is he someone that you wish that you crossed paths with during your career at any point?
Totally. Yeah, he's. I thought I would fight till I was 45, and I remember Anderson Silva was a young man when I was a young man. Was around the game, was learning, was studying, and I remember as the soft-spoken Muay Thai guy. And to see his development and to see his progress in MMA. I always knew, it's like martial arts. The guys that keep studying will eventually be the guys at the front going, check this out. So I always knew that eventually these guys would come back around and I'd be in line to face him, Vitor, all those guys. But I also knew, that my back has been jacked since I was 16. When I was 16, my leg went numb and the doctors were like, you need surgery. You're never going to play sports, and you're going to be a patient, for the rest of your life. And I was like, no way, I'm going to be a world champion. So I've had this injury, this progressive problem that I knew was going to catch up to me. And it, unfortunately, it caught up to me in my third phase of my career when I was, swinging against Diaz.
And Frank, you mentioned that, your body just didn't switch on like it used to. If you would have known that you had that much time left in the third leg of your career, would you have considered going to the UFC, to have some of those dream matchups such as Liddell, Couture, Franklin, some of those guys, knowing that, possibly you only have a few years left before you retire?
Yeah, at that, by the time Strikeforce had come along, that was a whole nother, kind of third career for me. I'd already sort of retired twice. And I didn't even expect that. The whole Strikeforce thing was totally unexpected. And I went for as long as I could, and I had the time of my life, and I was in so many roles there that, it wasn't just about becoming, the Strikeforce world champion or the middleweight world champion. It was about getting on network television and, competing against, the UFC and so many other things. And I was deeply tied to the cause of, mixed martial arts and, competition to the UFC and an open marketplace. So I was just blessed to have that third career. Because I never cared. I never anticipated it. Like I was golfing and I was like, I'm never going to fight again. And Scott was like, no, dude, there's a shot here and you should, go back to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going over your career now, you've done so much, you've accomplished so much. A lot of people credit you with being one of the first, complete and well-rounded fighters, in MMA. It only seems right that you get inducted into the UFC Hall of Fame. How is your relationship with Dana now, and do you see yourself possibly working with the UFC in some capacity in the future?
My relationship remains the same, which, it seems like we stand on two sides of the fence. But, I'm not opposed to being in the Hall of Fame. I know, was never, it is what it is. I organically, because of my star power and because of my ability in business, I organically started the competition. And it just put, myself, my brands, and my companies at odds with the UFC. And, they take it very personal when you stand against them. To me, I'm just very blessed to be successful in business. I have a successful fighting career. I've been able to turn that into television. And, I feel very blessed. I'm able to provide for my family through martial arts. And, I made some enemies along the way. But, I stood for what I believed in. And, I didn't compromise.
And it seems that really the theme with MMA, a lot of guys, when they stand their ground, obviously, you're going to upset some people. That's just the way life is. But I wanted to ask you this, and because Ken your brother happened to be on the show a couple of months ago. We spoke to him about his relationship with Dana, and at the time, obviously, it wasn't good at all. And many people see it similar with you and Dana. We did, however, ask Ken if he saw him and Dana seeing eye to eye, patching things up one day. And funnily enough, the next day, a certain phone call was made, and the two talked it out. And that was it. Now they're on good terms. Not the way the doctor feels or anything like that, but our theory is that time heals all. Obviously, in a career like yours, it's probably not high on your list. But would it sort of be something that you'd want to tick off the box that after having such a big career, now you're in the UFC Hall of Fame, and you can do things like that.
I mean, I don't know that. I mean, it's not something I desire. I'm in the Black Belt Hall of Fame. I'm in the American Martial Arts Hall of Fame. I'm in the Guinness World Records for my accolades. I've spoken to the Senate. For me, it was about this personal journey. And, if the UFC wants to recognize it, that's great. If they don't, that's great. It's not really my business, not really my company, so there's nothing I could do about it. But I would hope that someone who works so hard for the sport would be recognized for it. And I hope in the future that people that work so hard for the sport get recognized for it. Because that's what it's about. I got a whole bunch of plaques and a bunch of trophies and a bunch of belts and stuff. But it is nice to be included once in a while.
Absolutely, and I'd love to see you in the new UFC game one day, to be able to play as the great Frank Shamrock, and to have some of those matchups with Anderson Silva and some of the ones that we wanted to see. So hopefully that does happen. Now, Frank, we have some fan questions for you. We let fans know that you're coming on the show, and they sent through a few questions. So I've got a question here from Reach for the Sky. Reach for the Sky would like to know, you and Ken aren't blood brothers, yet you look a lot alike. Do you find that strange?
I did in the beginning, but I realized that my dad, who couldn't have kids, Bob Shamrock, and who adopted both of us, Ken and I, and who ran a home for thousands of, troubled kids and kids in group homes. He was looking for a specific look, and he always spoke about athletics and working hard and developing your body. He couldn't have kids, but he had a great open heart, and he had the vehicle to sort of have all these kids available to him, and you knew exactly what he wanted. He wanted this build, he wanted a certain look, he wanted a certain athleticism, and he picked his kids.
Now, I've got another fan question from GSP Fed Kobe 24. Was Bas Rutten the toughest fight in your career?
Bas Rutten was definitely the toughest fight in the first phase of my career. The toughest fight, because I had 3 of them with him. And the thing with Bas was he got tougher each time I fought him. The first time I was like, wow, I know how to beat him. And then the second time, he just kicked my ass. But he got better and stronger each time. Like, he was a real force to be reckoned with. And that's what I remember most about Bas. Like, he was just scary to fight.
And I was going to say, obviously, it's been a while since the fights. What's your relationship like with Bas now? Do you guys ever kick back, have a couple of drinks, and talk about that crazy trilogy that you guys shared?
we totally do, and he lives about 6 miles from my house. So we've been doing movies, and we hang out a little bit. And yeah, it's funny now because now it's like old, really old stuff that we talk about. We all have kids, and everything's moved on. But I still vividly remember those moments, and I still remember, walking out, looking over, and going, "Oh my God, I got to fight this guy again." He's the worst of them because he never stops. He just fights like a horse. And the whole time he's talking to you, the whole time he's saying weird stuff and talking to himself, and he's just having these weird conversations, which are both unnerving and just weird.
Yeah, Bus definitely talks a lot. I think that's one of the reasons why, MMA fans and everybody loves Bus so much. Now, we're going to do something with you really quick, Frank. It's called the Submission Radio Tap-Out Round. It's a bit of fun, basically. We're going to throw a few questions at you. You want to answer them pretty much with the first thing that comes to your mind, similar to word association. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right, you had a guest Roland Walker, Texas Ranger. Did you get a chance to hang out with Chuck and show him a couple of moves?
For sure. Taught him everything he knows.
How to grow a good beard. Now, you've done everything there is to do except competed in Pride. And if you could go back, is there one company, I know you mentioned that there was a contract on the table with Pride, but is there one company that you wish you could have fought for? We'll put Bellator in the mix there as well.
For sure. I wish I could have closed the deal with CBS to fight Ken Shamrock, my brother, because that would have been the biggest fight of all time.
Alrighty. Now, drugs in MMA, are they worse or have they always been this bad but nobody really tested properly?
Ooh. That's a good one. I think they're getting worse because the culture is so, and has been so lax about it, and so, more of find a solution than stop the problem. So I think they're getting worse.
Now, Jon Jones is going to be fighting Daniel Cormier. Cormier, of course, comes out of AKA, one of the gyms that you've had such a big impact on. Who do you think comes out of that fight the winner?
Ooh, that's a scary one. I honestly think that Daniel Cormier is probably the most well-trained wrestler, boxer, sort of MMA fighter in this era. And I don't think Jon Jones is going to get away from him or be able to knock him out. So, I think while Jones is probably 2 or 3 times the athlete, the rules of MMA dictate if you're on top, if you're punching first, if you cut the angle, you're doing the damage. And I just think that Cormier is going to do all the damage.
Very logical. And while we're doing predictions, obviously your former opponent, Nick Diaz, is versing Anderson Silva. How do you think that fight's going to go? Yeah.
Ooh, that's a tough one, yeah? That's way tough. The problem with that fight is Diaz's takedowns aren't like impacting strong. He's like grab and turn angle, but it's not like rip you down and take you down. And Silva's a guy you got to blast through with a strong takedown. So my concern with that fight is that as it progresses, the length, the confidence of Silva is going to damage Diaz, and the inability to take him down is going to damage him more. And I don't think Diaz is going to come out winning that fight.
Now, Frank, you trained with Goldberg in MMA. There are some videos out there. Tell us, do you think Goldberg could have made a decent MMA athlete if he didn't pursue the sport of pro wrestling?
Oh, totally. Yeah, because he was a super athlete who really knew his body. I mean, he literally, at the drop of a hat, he had a 360 on top of a Swiss ball, flipped all the way around, stood back up, which 1 out of 10 people do, and he did that at 290 pounds. So here's a guy that really knows how to move his body. He, had a professional career. If he would have focused on mixed martial arts with his passion, I think he definitely could have made an impact. And the only thing going against him was age. He just got older as the game developed and got ready. And, like every guy who got older, he didn't want to get hit in the head.
Yeah, of course. If you could have one rematch, I know you've had a lot of rematches in your career, but if you could have one, who would it be and why?
Well, I'd have to rematch Diaz. Or maybe Kung. I don't know. Probably Diaz. Because the Kung fight I really felt like I could have won. But the Diaz fight, I felt like even if I was in the best shape ever, he would have challenged me to the fullest. So that's a fight I would like to, revisit.
Absolutely, Frank. Now it's gym rescue time. You have to help us solve this problem. Me and Casper have opened a gym, and it turns out it's been built over an ancient pirate treasure site. So now you got to pick out of these three options of how we could save the gym. Option one is demolish the gym and recover the gold. Option two is add a pirate as an instructor and get him to run a class. Or option three is to add plush towels to the change rooms, because plush towels are soft, nice on the skin, and can be used for a variety of things. Make your option, Frank.
Okay. You know, I'd go with 2 or 3 at this point, and depending on what the instructor pirate had to wear as a uniform while instructing his classes.
Yeah, of course. Well, eye patch would be mandatory for OH&S reasons. Other than that, we like your idea with the towels, guys. You can follow Frank at Frank Shamrock on Twitter and www.frankshamrock.com, and of course keep an eye out for his new show Gym Rescue on Spike TV with our pal Randy Couture. Frank, it's been an absolute pleasure and honor having you on the show. Thank you so much.
Right on, guys. Thanks for having me.
What a legend at MMA. You know, it was such a pleasure having Frank Shamrock on the show. And, you know, we are running a little bit low on time, so we're only able to do a couple of fan questions this week. Send in your fan questions through our website, www.submissionradio.com. And, you know, send us through all your questions for next week's show, and we'll choose the best ones and have a chat about them on the show. But, you know, we've just got time for a couple of questions today. And, Cass, I'm pretty excited about these ones.
Yeah, me too. It's really great that the fans did send them in, so we just want to say thank you. And it's a great sort of excuse for us to talk about, you know, all sort of subjects, MMA, life, whatever the case is. And kicking off the first question, JP Gordon wants to know, are you boys looking forward to Metamoris next weekend? What do you think about the progression of grappling tournaments? Also, what's a dream matchup you'd like to see from an entertainment perspective in the future? Yeah, no, look, I really, really like what Metamoris is doing. What they've basically done is taken all the entertainment aspects of you know, MMA and, you know, essentially UFC, and similar to pro wrestling with the video packages, the sort of countdowns and, you know, the lead ups to the fights and things like that. And they've just added them to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which, you know, they're very same. They're very similar. You know, there's obviously people who they just like BJJ or guys that just like MMA, but at the end of the day, you know, it's still technically a fight. And I think a lot of those video packages and ways to excite people really work. And I mean, you know, grappling competitions have been around for so long. I mean, you know, ADCC and Grappler's Quest, like, you know, it's not really that new. But Metamoris, they've made it exciting. You know, it's invite only, and I think they're really going for super fights and dream matchups. You know, it's not so much a tournament. It's just, what do the fans want to see? Who are some grapplers that the fans want to see? You know, get it on, and let's make those fights, or those, you know, those matches. And I think it's awesome, and I think there's definitely going to be more popping up. The fact that obviously Relak Gracie is, you know, handling the whole thing adds another sort of, I guess, factor of legitimacy that yes, the Gracies do have their roots in this. So yeah, I think it's absolutely awesome. Yeah, I'm super excited. There's a lot of good matchups on this one. And as far as the second question, also, what's the dream matchup that we'd like to see? You know what? This is not going to be necessarily the most BJJ matchup, so I hope BJJ fans forgive me here. But, you know, hey, Josh Barnett is obviously on next Metamoris. He's versing Dean Lister. I would love to see Josh Barnett and Frank Mir in Metamoris, because Frank Mir is a guy who, you know, he's got fantastic jiu-jitsu. I think there are some ways that I'm probably going to cop shit for this one, but I don't know that he uses it as well as he could in MMA. I think there's a lot of things that, you know, he could do to maybe be a little bit more offensive from the bottom to set up sweeps and some transitions. And, you know, he's a guy that doesn't really get to use his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu much in MMA. You know, people have kind of figured out Frank. He's sort of a guy who, you know, if he doesn't take you down and he doesn't necessarily have the wrestling too, he might be in trouble. So I think, you know, put him in a Metamoris and put him up against a guy like Josh Barnett, who obviously is a catch wrestler, which is kind of like the opposite but very similar of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And, you know, let's see that fight that we've wanted to for a long time. Obviously, when they fought in the UFC, Frank got knocked out in the first round, but it was really the ground game that everybody was, you know, looking forward to. And I don't know too many fights in the UFC where, you know, even casual fans are like, I really want to see this, you know, get to the ground. Here, that's pretty much what you'd get. So for me, to be Frank Mir, Josh Barnett, and yeah, big fan of Metamoris. Dennis, what do you think?
Well, yeah, that's a great matchup there. I like what Metamoris is doing. I think what they're doing is what UFC are doing with MMA, whereas, there's amateur MMA and it's just not as exciting. And, professionally, they've taken it to the next level and they've also included all the clips, like you said, like Metamoris has. Now, instead of a million matches happening at once, you've got that one match in the middle and everybody's watching it. I think they're really bringing a new interest to Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and grappling. I think it's really, really smart. So I'm really happy for him, and I'll definitely keep an eye on this one. I'm very excited for the matchups. It seems like the matchups are getting better and better. When it comes to dream matchups, I've got a couple of crazy ones. How about this? We just had Pat Cummins on the show. He says he's a white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right?
Yeah.
Well, you get him on there with a guy that, I don't know, has great jiu-jitsu. Like, get him on there with Little Nog, for example. See what happens. Get him on there with, I don't know, get him on there with a pure jiu-jitsu guy that maybe fans don't know very much. And this pure jiu-jitsu guy all of a sudden goes, hey, you can't dominate us with a white belt just with wrestling. Have one of those typical wrestling versus Brazilian jiu-jitsu storylines. I think people will really, really like that. Get Vinny Magalhaes on there, see what Pat Cummins could do to him. Or, I love Pat, so I think that could be great for him. But for a dream matchup, there's just so many that they could do. Obviously, the UFC fighters, they have such a big name to them that I would just love to see just random UFC fighters, try their hand at grappling and get matched up. I mean, we could go to, we can have a Jon Jones versus Anderson Silva grappling match. We could have we could go crazy. I mean, there's just so many possibilities. Roy Nelson is another guy. I'd love to see him, in Metamoris, see what he's made of. So, a lot of names there, and they're doing a good job, the boys. So I'll be keeping an eye on this one.
And another good thing about Metamoris next weekend is obviously that Australia's own Kit Dale is going to be competing there. He's competing against Gary Lee Tonin from America. So really exciting to see that on a card where all you see is Americans and Brazilians. It's good to see an Aussie slotted in there. So, congratulations to Kit Dale for being on there, and the best of luck to him. Now, next question is from Gerald M. Funky, hope I pronounced that right. Nick Diaz versus Anderson Silva. Was it the right fight to make, and how do you see it going? Simply put, yes, it was the right fight to make. I think with Nick Diaz, he's in a funny position in the sense that he's a big draw. He wants the title. He obviously doesn't want to fight any up-and-comers, which, that whole side of things I think is a little bit debatable. He's obviously coming off 2 losses. But, at the end of the day, Anderson Silva himself is coming off a loss. I think, 2 losses. You could argue that, has he really earned the right to fight a guy like Anderson Silva? They're both coming off losses. Nick Diaz has fought a middleweight in the past. And just from a fan's perspective, from a fun fight, absolutely. I don't understand people that don't think this fight should have been made. Honestly, Anderson Silva's in this strange part of his career where, he doesn't necessarily want to fight for the title. He's lost to the champ twice. He wants fun fights. What's he going to do? Go to light heavyweight? And, I don't see too many other fights for him in the middleweight division that are necessarily fun fights. Like, he could verse Luke Rockhold, but, and I'm sure it'd be a good fight, but it's not a fun fight. It's not something that's really going to headline a pay-per-view. That's just another really, contenders fight. In comes Nick Diaz. That's, I think, the epitome of a fun fight. These guys are not going to go to the ground, I'm pretty sure. It's going to be a stand-up affair, whether you're, a mixed martial arts enthusiast or you're just a Just Bleed fan. I think this fight is going to be sick. It's 2 guys, fantastic striking, yet different styles. Anderson Silva more, kickboxing, and Muay Thai. Nick Diaz more pure boxing. I can't wait to see it. This is one of those fights that, it'd be a crime if it didn't happen. And I don't think too many people expected it, and this is what I love about the UFC. They really try and make the fights that people want to see, regardless of the rankings, regardless of whether it necessarily makes sense. Fans want to see them, and they make them. So I'm really happy about that. Yes, fantastic idea to make the fight. As far as the way I see it going, look, this is a really tough one. I think it all depends on how Anderson Silva will be when he comes back. You know that Nick Diaz is going to be in shape. The guy does triathlons and rides his bike and this and that. I don't think Nick Diaz has ever not been in shape. The big question is, how is Anderson Silva going to come in? I think on paper, he is better than Nick Diaz. I think his striking is a lot more diverse. I don't think Nick's going to be able to take him down. I think on the ground, Anderson Silva will be able to hang with Nick Diaz, no problems. I think Anderson's the bigger, stronger guy. I think if Nick would win this one, and that's a big if, would be if Anderson Silva's chin, his once legendary chin if it doesn't hold up, and if Nick can really tire out Anderson Silva. And I think a lot of this will be telling in the first couple of rounds. If Nick Diaz can really push the pace and get to Anderson Silva without Anderson, loosening up and bobbing and weaving and dancing around the octagon, if Nick can really push the pace and get to him and land body shots and things like that, then I think we may see Anderson Silva possibly losing in the later rounds. But if we see the first couple of rounds with Anderson Silva, very confident, dancing around, then I think it's going to be a really tough night for Nick Diaz. And as we've seen, Anderson Silva loves when guys come forward. He's a counterpuncher, and worked very badly against Forrest Griffin. So either way, I think this is still a bit of a toss-up, but it's a fight that I'm really excited about. What about you, Dennis?
Well, Nick Diaz versus Anderson Silva. Obviously, the UFC want to get Nick Diaz back in there, any means necessary. Now, Nick, he wants the big fights, and I think this is a very interesting fight they put together. Would I have matched up Nick with someone else? I'm not sure, but Nick only wants a title shot. I think if he didn't get this fight, who do you match him up with? I think that's the problem. He wants Hendricks, or he doesn't want to fight. So then you got to give him a guy like Anderson Silva. I think it's an interesting matchup. I'm happy they made it. Anderson Silva is a weird guy. When people are respectful towards him leading up to fights, in the fight he'll do his own version of trash talking, where he'll move around, he'll waggle around and get into the guy's head of really believing that Anderson is superhuman. When there's a lead up to his fight, such as with the Chael Sonnen, where the guy's talking trash about Anderson, you see a different Anderson in the ring. It's almost like if a guy talks trash to Anderson, he's not going to be acting crazy and doing all this crazy stuff. But if a guy's respectful to him, he'll take advantage of that and start to implement his god moves, make it look like he's a superhuman. But it's going to be interesting with this one. I actually give Nick Diaz no chance in this fight whatsoever. It's going to be 100%, in my opinion. Not many people are going to agree with this. Anderson Silva's fight, if he comes back 100% from the leg break, which is a significant leg break. If we see the same Anderson Silva, in my opinion, as we did, before the Chris Weidman fights, I think he easily goes through Nick Diaz, and it's not a skill thing. I just think it's a size thing. Anderson Silva is so much bigger than Nick Diaz. He'll have so much more power. I believe his striking's a lot better than Nick's. Obviously this will be a stand-up affair. I don't really see how Nick's going to win this one. I mean, he's got some, like you mentioned, some great combinations, but he comes forward a lot. And then the other thing I'm worried about with this fight is, what if it turns out to be really awkward, such as, Nick Diaz realizes what he's doing is not working, so he's kind of hanging back, and then Anderson Silva starts to hang back, and then he's doing some weird move, and then Nick's flipping him off, and then people are like, what's going on? This is Dubai all over again. It would be funny if that happened. But if Anderson Silva's leg's 100%, it comes back close to the person that he used to be, I think he beats Nick Diaz. And I don't really give Nick much of a chance in this one. But interestingly enough, if Nick Diaz does win this fight, he'll want to fight for the title. He wants to fight for the title. He wants a fight that leads to the title. And the UFC are all for that. So if I'm the UFC, because I know that Anderson Silva, he's got a few fights left, but I think I can make a few more bucks with Nick Diaz at the moment. I'd want to see Nick Diaz win. If Anderson Silva wins this one, that's an interesting one. I don't know if he's got aspirations of fighting for the title again. So, but him versus Weidman 3 or some of the other crazy matchups he could go and would certainly draw some cash. So, I'm very interested to see what happens with this one. But yeah, I don't give Nick Diaz a very much big opportunity at this one. And the other thing with Nick Diaz that sort of upsets me sometimes is when a fight doesn't go his way, he kind of gets frustrated. He doesn't change anything up. He just does what he does. When he does what he does and it works, he's great. When he does what he does and it doesn't work, he doesn't change anything up. He'll just keep doing it. So it's like in the GSP fight. Eventually, near the end of the fight, he'd decide, all right, I'm going to, stop these takedowns and, I'm going to change up my game plan. And all of a sudden, he started doing really well near the end of the fight. So I hope Nick comes in with the mindset of being open and being able to utilize a whole bunch of different techniques in this one. But yeah, that's just my personal opinion. I don't think that many people will agree with it.
And you know what? It's interesting what you said about, obviously, if the fight turns out awkward. I mean, everybody remembers the Abu Dhabi incident of '89. Anderson Silva versus Damian Maia, and you know the So You Think You Can Dance contest that we witnessed that night. And you know what? I wouldn't put it past either of them. Anderson Silva is really eccentric. He's a really different guy. He loves to mess with the media and give his his short responses about UFC is UFC and this and that. And Nick Diaz obviously embodies the spirit of eccentricity. I think that's a word. So honestly, nothing would surprise me. And we were talking to some fans through our Twitter, Submission AUS, shameless plug like Pat Cummins. We posed the question: would you be as excited for Nick Diaz? Sorry, would you be as excited for Johnny Hendricks versus Anderson Silva as for Nick Diaz versus Anderson Silva? Because technically, people are calling this fight a super fight, and there is that debate: is it really a super fight? I mean, there's no titles involved. What exactly makes it a super fight other than, both the big names? Now, if you put Johnny Hendricks in there, he's got a title, and he's moving up, obviously, in weight, much like Nick Diaz, but he's never fought at middleweight before. Would you be more excited? Because in theory, on paper, that would be a bigger fight. And generally speaking, people said no, they wouldn't. The other thing with that one, it just goes to show, in my opinion, that it was the correct fight to make. If people don't want to see necessarily the welterweight champion against a guy like Anderson Silva, but they do want to see Nick Diaz versus Anderson Silva, then in my opinion, that pretty much solidifies this as, the correct fight to make.
Yeah, and it's definitely a lot better than when they put Chael Sonnen in with Jon Jones. I think this is a correct way of doing prize fighting. Because I know there's a lot of guys out there, and we've got to get going because we're running out of time, so I'll keep this brief. But I know there's a lot of guys out there that say all that MMA is prize fighting. So just entertaining people and putting the right fights together. And I disagree. I think 80% of MMA is putting the right fighters together and then making that fight entertaining. I don't think you can just get two guys together just to draw money. Now, I'm not big on that. I think there needs to be a story, but there also needs to be a sense of the person belongs in that matchup. And I think this is a really good way of using two guys that are sort of out of the mix in terms of going for the title at the moment, but then making a matchup with them where it's still so relevant to all of the fans. So I think I clap to the UFC for that one. And I think, yeah, they did a really good job. I'll tell you what, though, people are going to be talking, and I'm going to be interested to see what happens. And it's definitely going to be a very interesting one, to say the least.
Yeah, and just quickly on that, with the UFC and, taking your hats off when where credit is due. I mean, a lot of people sort of complain. I see people complaining about this kind of matchup and, saying that, a lot of these matchups, like with Conor McGregor, etc., they vault these guys into positions that they haven't necessarily earned. But the crazy thing is, the people often say with Bellator, the tournament format needs to go. It doesn't work. If you have a tournament format, you miss out on a lot of good fights. Obviously Strikeforce, they had a great heavyweight tournament, but I mean, everybody wanted to see Fedor versus Overeem, and that didn't happen, of course, because Bigfoot stood in the way of that and defeated Fedor. So I think if you can see sort of with Bellator that they need to get rid of the tournament format. Same with the UFC. I mean, they're the ones who don't have a tournament for that very reason. They want to make the fights that people want to see, when it's possible. You don't want to look back and, obviously GSP versus Anderson Silva. I mean, it's nothing to do with the tournament format, but it's something that the fans wanted. UFC tried to do it. It didn't happen, but at least they try to do it. You don't want to look back in 10 years and go, what if this guy fought that guy and this and that? So I'm just glad that we're getting to see Nick Diaz versus Anderson Silva. But I think, like you said, Dennis, we are running a little bit low on time, so we have to put a bow on this one. Thanks to JP Gordon and Gerald M. Funky for sending any questions. And if you ever have any further questions for us, we'll be doing this as a weekly segment from now on, guys. So send them in to info@submissionradio.com and check out the website, submissionradio.com. All the latest episodes will be up there, and of course, transcripts and articles from the show. Follow us on Twitter @SubmissionAUS. And of course, check out the Facebook page, Submission Radio AUS. And if you've enjoyed the show, by all means, subscribe. And if you haven't enjoyed the show, then you should probably subscribe as well.
Yeah, that's right, guys. Subscribe to something that you don't enjoy, and that way every day you'll have a reminder of pain and torture. You can let us know if there's something about the show you don't like. We'll fire our producer if we have to, if that means you'll subscribe to us, and then we'll sneakily hire him back because we've already got your subscription. But no, thank you very much for the support, all the fan questions. Thanks to Frank Shamrock. Thanks to Pat Cummins. Thanks to Mike Kogan, who came on and was very honest with us about everything that's going on with Nate Diaz. And thanks to everybody who listens. We usually get a couple of great comments from people saying they've listened to the show, they've subscribed. Every little comment that you guys write, we read, we appreciate. It makes us want to put out a new episode that's even bigger and better the following week. So we appreciate all the comments.
Thanks again for listening, guys. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. Of course, the Submission Radio channel, and we've got a lot of awesome guests lined up for next week and the following week. So just want to say thanks from both of us, guys. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll see you soon.